this podcast, we'll talk about running analytics in a media business. Stay tuned. Welcome everyone to another episode of Future of Data podcast. Today we have with us an interesting guest, Clayton Kim. He is a director of data science at Tivo, responsible for managing the application of machine learning and statistical research on TV consumption data. Before Tivo, Clayton was with the senior manager of data science at Localytics, working on applying predictive intelligence to mobile app analytics and messaging. Clayton, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Beautiful. So, before we start, by the way, good choice of a Twitter handle. I think it's the Clay method, right?
Yeah, it actually came from my days when I was a personal trainer, so I decided to keep it. It's now my GitHub handle.
Nice.
And Instagram too.
So, what is Clay method? If you can share some insights.
You know, it covers a lot of things. I think it's the data-driven approach to everything. So in the world of physical training, you have like weightlifting, you have sprinting, you have different domains. In the world of data science, you have like machine learning and these principles that you can apply. But really, like data science can be applied to any aspect of life. And so I did that with my personal training. I wanted to see like what made you stronger, what made you faster, what impacted your blood numbers, and like really like quantifiable aspects of your body and performance that like, you know, a lot of other people in that space like just didn't. They go completely by feel, where it's like, yeah, you look a little better. No, I want measurements. I want like actionable insights and like things that you can relate back to what you've been doing. So this principle has applied through my career, first through like grad school and when I was trying to make some side money as a trainer, and then now as a data scientist.
We'll resume after a short break. This part of the program is sponsored by JobFair at Tao.ai. To learn more, go to JobFair, that's JOBFAIR.TAO.ai. A fastest AI-driven way to help you find your next job. Do check them out. Let's get back to the podcast. So let's talk about your current role. So directors of data science at Tivo. What does it really mean? If you can share with our audience.
Sure. So Tivo, a lot of people know us as that DVR company, like recording, rewinding, like live television. Tivo's evolved beyond that over the years because with these devices in the market, and with this incredible intellectual property portfolio, we have created deals where we collect data on TV consumption habits, where like, you know, your set-top boxes know what channels you're watching, what pieces of content you're viewing. And so what we do is we take that data and we provide insights based off of it. So half the team is really organized around creating panels. So based on this like relatively sparse, for some aspects of panel data, like TV consumption, we merge that in with like, you know, your consumption data, whether or not it's like, you know, pharmacy records, loyalty programs, things like that, so that advertisers can get a better sense of like what kind of people are watching the show, what kind of value are they driving from the ads. The other half of the team is really dedicated to the predictive component of that. So given everything we know about the TV viewing audience, what can we do to predict their consumption, you know, 3 months from now, where you have new fall series, prime time stuff, like even like overnight, daytime, whatever. We're trying to predict the ratings across all these shows so that advertisers can better place these advertisements for consumption and make them more relevant to the viewer.
Interesting.
Yeah, so the role itself, like the team is largely focused around research. My background is much more engineering heavy. And so this has been an interesting transition in that, you know, going from an engineering role where you're trying to produce like machine learning APIs and like distributed data systems is something much more research focused, where like, you know, you're trying to determine what set of algorithms are good at predicting TV consumption behavior.
Interesting. So, thank you for that update. So let's talk about your journey to this role. So if you can just
Sure.
shed some light, I think I briefly introduced, but that barely covers the complete pack of the claim method. So if you can just walk us through like your journey to this role, that would be
Sure.
helpful.
Yeah, so I have a really non-traditional path to becoming a data scientist. So I like to give a disclaimer anytime I tell the story about survivorship bias. I don't know if you follow the XKCD comic, but there's one about survivorship bias where like every
Right.
TED talk should have a disclaimer where it's like the little comic is like you should play the lottery. You should put every dollar that you can into the lottery because eventually you will win. And
Right.
so, like, my non-traditional path may not be for everyone, but it worked for me. So it goes from this. So undergrad, I studied mostly finance and neuroscience. So primarily around like human biological signals research with EEG and fMRI, and then, trying to quantify the stock market. So that gave me a pretty good statistical backing for when I decided to go to law school for some reason. I thought that was going to be a great idea. Turns out it wasn't. Law is like very anti-innovation, kind of boring. And so I decided to leave that and go into industry. I worked around as an analyst in the agency world for a bit, actually, where advertisers were finally getting the sense that like agencies really need to provide good reporting and good analytics to show ROI on their campaigns rather than just like kind of throwing them out there with social. And so I worked with this agency Hyphen to create that department around analytics. Along the way, I had side projects where I was building like, multi-arm banded A/B testing APIs and like computer vision methods for detecting manufacturing faults. So I was just like picking up side projects here and there to like really hone my skills to become a better data scientist. Along the way, I got picked up by the startup in San Francisco called BigLink. They were in the affiliate marketing space, so ad tech. Worked for them for a little bit. And along the way, one of my clients from my freelancing days got acquired by Localytics and needed a new head of data science. And so they brought me on board to start that department, build out their predictive analytics capabilities, since the customers are apps. Think like, Hulu, the Weather Channel, Nordstrom. Like if you are a major player in the app space, like chances are you use like Adobe, Localytics, or
Right.
like Mixpanel, or like, one of the 5 big players. And so my charter there was to be able to predict user app behavior, primarily around user retention, since retention is a huge problem within the app space where like, chances are you're churning out like 50 to 80% of your users every single month, and you're spending tons of money trying to acquire new users, getting them to download. And so like even chipping away at that problem provides huge value. And then I was looking for something else, came to Tivo, where I got the opportunity to lead a larger team. And so here we're much more focused around the research component, but really trying to bring in the discipline of like software engineering and shipping product to a team that was mostly focused on research, and like making that transition has been what I've been working on.
Interesting. I think it definitely sounds like your play method, because like going to a gym, it's you're just brushing up your skills at totally different discrete sort of silos. So thank you so much for sharing that with our audience. So let's talk about analytics on the media side. I think since you're coming from the agency and it's like, what have you seen? Like, what are some of your observation of how the industry is shifting, or like what are some of your thoughts on from the time when you landed in this industry to the time today when you're say working with Tivo, understanding like how has the industry shifted, whether it comes to how they consume data, or whether it comes to the use of AI or whatever these new buzzwords that we hear every day about. Do do you have some insights on those?
If I had a nickel for every time I hear like it's the big one these days has been AI, but when I started, it was big data. Everyone wanted to get involved with big data, but didn't really know what it meant. So when I started with the media industry, they were just kind of getting used to these new metrics around social, where like, with TV and internet advertising, like keyword searches, like media companies were like pretty used to monitoring metrics and like being data driven. But with social, they all hired like, 23-year-old kids out of college that like were good at Twitter and like had them running accounts and had no accountability or really like any way to measure ROI there. And then throughout my career, I've seen that like, this has shifted over to agencies and like full teams, and this has just become another channel for companies to reach their audiences. That being said, there's still a lot of fragmentation within the media industry, where you have some companies that are super mature and like really good at this, where they have processes that are very data driven, and other companies that are just kind of like shooting from the hip. And so like you'd be surprised how many like large media companies I've seen that have no idea what they're doing in the app space, because they're just not used to seeing those metrics. They have no idea how to correlate that with like, their previous world of set-top boxes. And so my role with Localytics is really to get these companies to buy in and build these metrics and like these insights into their day-to-day business practices. Because like without it, then you're just kind of throwing things into the ether and like hoping that they stick, rather than really being able to assess performance.
We'll resume after a short break. This part of the program is sponsored by JobFair at Tao.ai. To learn more, go to JobFair, that's JOBFAIR.TAO.ai. A fastest AI-driven way to help you find your next job. Do check them out. Let's get back to the podcast. Interesting. So I think I always wonder, and I had this conversation with, I think we had two guests before who they were from the agency side, and we had a good conversation around how much of they think data actually help in something like a creative industry. Like, do you have any perspective on that? I know that you have some industry bias, but from your understanding, like, do you have that? How efficient is data when you talk about predicting creative outcomes?
Sure. So like predicting creative outcomes is a really hard problem, because like you never know what's going to go viral. If you were able to like train a model to determine if a video is able to go viral, you would make lots and lots of money. Right. And so I think the value there is around iteration. It's like all relative to what you know. So, you have, piece of content A versus piece of content B. You can know that like A performs better than B, and then you still rely on that human component of figuring out like what made A better than B. And you're able to iterate more rapidly and experiment, which I think is the value that like data brings to the media space, is to like determine like what is your what is better than the other. The other piece of that is around audience segmentation. So not everything is going to be objectively better than anything else. It really matters on who you're targeting. And so if you have a piece of content that is underperforming, like maybe you're just reaching the wrong audience, maybe you're segmenting to the wrong people. And so that's where data can really provide value, because you have so much data about the consumption of media, whether it's on mobile, like people have these devices in their pockets that they're just on all day, that they're constantly consuming, and you're recording those events and seeing like what they would want. And so based on that, you could segment out portions of your population, of your audience, that really that can get a piece of content and resonate with it, where relevant content is a lot more valuable than like just generally good content.
Interesting. And so let's talk about some of the interesting use cases that you're seeing data deliver in your industry. So like, what are some of the interesting insights that you think that or if you can, or let's take it from a fresher's perspective. So if I'm a fresher in the industry and I was asked to use data for decision making, what are some of the steps you would sort of suggest for someone like me to pursue?
Sure. So within the media space, there are, at least in TV, there's like two kind of like, there's a holy war that's occurring, right? There you have the traditional linear TV, and then you have digital. Each has its own trade-offs. With digital, you could go on Hulu and you're watching, your show, and you could have an ad that is targeted directly at you. While TV, you have to get the same ad as, however many millions of people are watching that channel. And so that's an assessment that needs to be made around like ROI, where you can do attribution on both, where TV, you have your statistical panels, you have like, down the line purchasing data that you can merge in with that. And, what determination for ROI can you get? What measurements can you take? Like, what is the impact that you're making on your business? While with digital, it's a lot easier because you have cookies. So you have a direct cookie from an ad click, or, you have an ad impression that's also cookied, and you go all the way through a purchase funnel on a website, and that's like directly attributable. So like, what kind of resolution do you need on your data in order to gather insights? Linear TV is still the best in terms of reaching a large audience. And to do it relatively cheaply from a pure CPM standpoint. Like, Google keywords can get insanely expensive for like insurance, or like insurance, airlines, like particular industries, like really that like dense portion away from the long tail, like can get very, very expensive, but you're reaching a more target audience. While TV, you're sacrificing some of that granularity for just that spread.
Interesting. So let's talk about like your perspective on, say, so there's a third screen, mobile, there is sort of TV, then there's a laptop. Like, how do basically your data science practice or monitor data? So are there classifiers for these three entities, like different when you talk about their consumption, or do you treat like content and these three are like three distribution channel? Like, how do you perceive a content delivered through this platform from the data science or monitoring standpoint?
Sure. So from an analytics standpoint, they're very different because they're all completely different data streams. So from like a logistics standpoint, it's just like hard to deal with. However, conceptually, you don't want to have to think about them as like, watching TV on linear TV versus like on demand versus, on a streaming center on a laptop versus a mobile app. Like, really, like, the industry is moving towards a place where you think about TV as any way that an individual can watch like serialized content that's typically on the order of like 30 minutes to an hour on any device. And we as a data science organization is really pushing to be on the forefront of that, of providing the metrics and the insights and like the thought leadership around how to view TV, regardless of where people are watching it.
Interesting. I think so. Thank you so much for kindly sharing and talking about these some of the interesting points and helping us understand the industry a bit better. So let's talk about the talent in the industry. So let's talk about data scientists. I think that's a very typical cliche, right? So whatever. So can you define a typical data scientist in media business?
Sure. So data science, I always say, is a loaded term, since it could really mean anything. I think the industry has been getting better at defining what that role is, but like it can mean anything from, a machine learning engineer to someone that's a data platform engineer, data visualization person, to like, someone that was traditionally an analyst. And so it really depends on the team and what you're trying to accomplish. I think for smaller companies, like, it should really be much more engineering focused, since you're trying to deliver product. It doesn't matter that you can, get some like large convolutional neural network to fit some like, some training set like 5% faster. Like, that's not what's going to bring your company value early on. If you're Google or Facebook, yeah, that provides tons of value. But if you are a 100-person startup trying to start up get a data science team together, You don't want to hire some researcher that slings R code and like has never brought anything into production before. So really, I focus on engineering skills, since like if you can't write code, and if you can't write code that communicates well to others, then like you don't provide value within an organization. You're just going to be in a silo, like on your ivory tower, pontificating about algorithms, and then like no value will come from it. Like these are still businesses. So that being said, I am a big believer around data science mentorship. This is still a young field. There's a lot of young talent that's hungry to get into it, and a lot of energy, but not a lot of great resources to like mold them into productive members of teams. Data scientists in a lot of organizations still are thought of as largely just like individual solo contributors that like churn away on a problem and like, eventually come up with a solution, maybe not. They like throw it over to some developers. They take 6 months to translate some R code into Java, and like that's all a nightmare. Like I would much rather have like a cohesive team that can work together, that can communicate with engineering and work with them along the way, so that you build and deliver a superior product in far less time. Like, will all those people be able to provide like cutting edge tech in AI? No, but chances are if you're within like the first 3 years of your data science org starting up, like you're going to be implementing open source solutions anyway. Like you're not going to be doing like tons of custom implementations. Like XGBoost already exists. Like you don't need to reinvent the wheel.
We'll resume after a short break. This part of the program is sponsored by JobFair at Tao.ai. To learn more, go to JobFair, that's JOBFAIR.TAO.ai. A fastest AI-driven way to help you find your next job. Do check them out. Let's get back to the podcast. Interesting. So thank you for sharing that. So let's talk about I think one thing that I talk to most of the people coming from the media industry. So media is, again, it's a very creative industry, right? So and typically I use the saying of art of doing business and science of doing business, right? So data provides a science of doing business, and like company like media or marketing, they are pretty much like art of doing business, using somewhat science of doing business to get things done, right? And so like now let me hear your perspective on what do you think your industry is up to? Like how efficient are they in mixing these two capabilities, art vis-a-vis of science, working together to deliver an outcome? Like what is your personal take on what you're seeing in the industry? Like how are they using data today to, and
Sure.
You shared a bunch of things previously as well, but I'd love to know your point of view.
Sure. So as we said before with the buzzwords, going from big data to machine learning to now AI, people are hungry to use the data. Like they want to be able to use it even if they have no training in it. If you're purely a creative, like you're still curious about like what the data says about your work. And merging the art and the science of business comes down to communication. And I think that's a skill that a lot of data scientists lack. You typically hire out of, like PhD programs in quantitative fields. And there's not a lot of training in those worlds on like how to sell an idea, how to get people to buy in and believe that the data is telling the story that you want them to believe. And so I put a lot of emphasis around communication, presentation skills, and of course, listening skills. Because data scientists cannot function in a business like in a silo. Like they have to work with other functional organizations. You want to work with an art department, like you have to be able to speak their language. And it is not about dumbing things down. Like that's the last thing you want to do when you're trying to communicate to someone else in a different business context. Like you actually just need to make the content more relatable. And that takes training and things outside of like coding and machine learning. This is like an interpersonal skill that like is typically required in a business context, that since data science is such a new field, like we haven't been held to those standards. And I have very much been pushing my people and everyone that I work with to be better communicators.
Interesting. I think that's very well said. So now let's talk about, I think, and this we hear a lot about, since as you said, it's a new industry, and people are just trying to get started in data science. So there is always a first people in the group problem that most of people that we talk to are facing, that hey, they are told they're putting together a group in data science, or a practice in data science, or a product in data science. So what are some of the initial or five or four or five steps that you could recommend to someone who is told to put together a data science team or practice within an organization or group?
Sure. So I think that the first thing to avoid is hiring a pure academic. I've seen dozens of companies do this, where they hire someone that has like purely worked in academia and has no like sense of delivering solutions and like the speed in which you would require in a business, and also like communicating these findings and like really like getting buy-in from the rest of the organization. Like they're so focused on research that they like might end up producing an algorithm that like fits to some data set that they've acquired, but like building a product around that is completely different. So I actually focus around engineers who are hungry to do data science. People who have like side projects where they like create an app that can recognize if things are a hot dog or not. Like that would be an ideal case for someone within your organization to like start the data science practice, where you have an existing engineer, they work nights and weekends on something where they're like learning about data science, learning about implementing these open source models, and already understands your business, already understands your architecture to like really lead that charge. From there, you might need some specialists, but like I tend to staff data science teams like a heist crew. I don't know if you've ever seen Ocean's 11, but that's like my ideal team. In this context, of course, I am George Clooney, Danny Ocean, but along the way, you need like someone who can handle the details, where like they are a good machine learning engineer, or someone who understands the business problem. You need your demolitions expert, someone who can like put things into practice and is dangerous enough to make it work. You need your Livingston Dell, that nervous IT guy who sweats and tells you that all your ideas are impossible because like they're not on scalable servers. It's like your problem's not horizontally scalable, or it's not monitored properly. Like you need proper monitoring and versioning in your APIs, otherwise like it's going to fail like any other bad engineering project. And then of course like you need the Mormon twins, the more junior guys that handle a lot of the legwork, because 90% of the time data science is just janitorial work. You're dealing with malformed JSON, rows or like columns in the database that you don't understand because they were made like 8 years ago by some engineer that quit the company like long before you got there. Like these things are real problems in data science, and it's going to take up a ton of your time. And so you want someone who is a fully capable engineer that can build solutions end to end and understand the problem, rather than someone who is laser focused on some small subset of the overall problem.
Interesting. So I think your top advice for someone to start this practice is to go and watch Ocean 11, and then probably recruit those guys. That's not that bad for the first day.
Yeah.
So
and also like they're also all capable thieves, and I think that's the analogy that I want to bring to this, is that like in this case, instead of thievery, software engineers, like you're all capable coders, and that is the core skill that you want everyone to have. No, and then of course each one has a specialty.
I think you're spot on. I used to tell them go and watch Avengers, but I think I would like your analogy better, because they're still humans trying to solve a very collective out. So I think that's good. So let's talk about.
Although I do own a large hammer, so I guess we can go with the Avengers are out.
IT would love seeing large hammer, so sure. So let's talk about some success KPIs that you see in your industries. If you can shed some light on what, like, as a data science practitioner in your industry of like digital and content and media, like what are some of the like normal KPIs that you look for as a success metric for delivering your outcome? If you can shed some light on that.
Sure. So I think of data science as any other engineering discipline
Hmm.
where like, you would have like mobile developers, front end, back end, data platform, like any of those are like different disciplines within engineering, but are all held to like similar KPIs where you have like team velocity, delivery rates, um, team retention, like it's not so new that you cannot apply existing like frameworks that have worked in the past with other engineering organizations. So let's say your data science team works in a traditional 2 week sprint. A lot of organizations, they just like allow people to like research and research and research, iterate and iterate and iterate forever until like they come up with the result and like some report that gets thrown on a Confluence page somewhere that like doesn't do anything. I would much rather have this thing time boxed to 2 weeks,
Hmm.
and that deliverable being like a recommendation of like, what we know and a recommendation of like whether or not we should continue. And
Hmm.
so keeping the team to like these velocity standards that you have with any other agile organization is like super important. Along the way, like data scientists are like, very, very um, typically hard to retain. Like one, there's a lot of demand for seasoned data scientists out there, so it's really easy to jump ship. And two, like like it's a personality type that gets bored easily. Like a lot of us became data scientists because we want to solve interesting problems, and if you're
Hmm.
not giving them interesting problems that are engaging, like they'll go find new ones, especially the good ones will. So are you able to keep your data scientists engaged, but at the same time are you able to keep them focused? And so that's the dichotomy that you have to balance as a manager.
Interesting, interesting. And I think one question I have for you for sure is your perspective on importance of data scientist in data science. So, like, do you have a perspective there?
Yeah, I think it's extremely important that there are people that can understand the data. I think that a good data scientist will make herself obsolete every 6 months, where they have everything that they've worked on and they've automated it in a way that they have the rest of the organization bought in on it, that everyone else understands the problem, and that like they are now obsolete. And of course, along the way, they have picked up new skills and found new problems to do that and just continue that cycle and keep driving value within the organization.
Interesting, interesting. So now let's talk about some of the interesting companies that you see around doing some interesting works. Like, do you have any companies or any solutions or any products that you really love what they are doing, how they're implementing it, and their strategy? If you can shed some light on that.
Sure. So I really admire Airbnb's data science team.
Mm,
It's a large team, but there is an incredible education component around it. They have this like university, mini university within the organization where there are resources to learn different techniques. And not everyone is going to be an expert in every data science technique, but they provide the resources for people to learn the things that they need to do in order to work on projects. They also have like, a few great open source projects that really shed some light into the way the teams work and the teams can like collaborate together. On the content side, Stitch Fix, I think, produces incredible content where they are really good at communicating aspects of data science and machine learning to, a less technical person in a really
mm,
beautiful, like, storytelling type blog. And then, of course, Spotify, I think they're doing amazing work around the machine learning space. They were like, one of the first big Hadoop clusters. Like they were the cutting edge of Spark for recommendations. Like, so they have been pushing the envelope with the data science team for, the last several years. And so I admire them a lot as well.
interesting. I think so. You raise an interesting point, by the way. So we hear a lot from many businesses who are anxious about getting the AI talent pool. So they say, hey, who should we hire, right? And so I said, okay, what's your problem that you're trying to solve? Like machine learning itself means pretty much nothing, right? It's just what are
Mm-hmm.
the applications. So like, what are some of your thinking? If someone is anxious to hire, say, the buzzword or the buzziest word nowadays is machine learning and AI. Like, what sort of some of the things that comes to your mind that at least the practitioner who is getting into those roles should ask or should know before stepping in and not really burning himself down, not knowing where they're and how they're indulging. So what are some of your thoughts?
Right. So, like, as soon as someone says that they need a neural network or some AI implementation to solve a problem, I like immediately ask them what their problem is, and
Right.
like to get them to critically think about like whether or not you actually do need that. Because like 99% of the time, like
Yeah.
a problem can be solved, like a model can be fit around like XGBoost or random forest, and it'll do like
Mm.
almost as good of a job, and you don't need to set up a cluster of GPU machines to like actually solve, like to train your model. Which I think is something that people forget about. Is like if you have this like huge operational expense of like maintaining a new type of cluster in order to like train this data, or you're just like lacking expertise. I think that one big thing that data science as a whole can benefit from, and anyone thinking about data science as well, is around discipline. Uh,
Mm.
Data scientists are great. They're creative thinkers. They tackle new and interesting problems, but I'm seeing a lot of lack of discipline
Mm.
within these teams where they're not adhering to any real coding standards, versioning their models properly, documenting things well. And like people thinking about data science, like they're not disciplined in that they're not thinking about that problem set. They're not thinking about like what is the minimum investment that you can make to get value and iterating on it. Like if you already have a fairly sophisticated model in production that's serving 10,000 requests per second, like then maybe it's time to
Mm.
think about a neural network. But like the first step should not be going straight to a neural network. That is your sprint. That is like you need to walk, or you need to like crawl, walk, and run before you get to that full-on sprint.
Interesting, interesting. And now let's talk about culture. I think so. Tivo is substantially big company, and
Yeah.
with bigger companies come bigger challenges, right? When it comes to culture
Sorry,
or
I lost you for a second.
so with bigger company comes bigger challenges. I think they have a stronger culture. They have a stronger perceptions. So like for people who are tackling say data science problems in bigger companies, like do you have some insights for those guys? What are some of the things they could do to overcome these challenges?
Yeah, so of course, any larger company, it's a bigger ship. It's harder to turn. That being said, there's definitely areas that you could carve out and establish ownership in. So the biggest skill that you can have for you to add value in a larger company is communication. Without being able to get other people to buy in on these ideas, like whether or not they're even possible, or like worthwhile in terms of investments, like because people are just used to the way they're doing things, is to like communicate with them, get them bought in, get them to believe your story. Otherwise you won't get anywhere. Like you will not get anywhere in a large organization working in you're at your desk all the time.
Right.
You have to get people to like work on the problem with you and get them excited about it.
Interesting. So let's talk about you for a few minutes. So
All right.
what is that drove you into this industry? Like what, like do you, if you can shed some light of why you picked media and mobile and at least the ad side of that landscape.
Sure. So I really like these industries because it touches so many people. There are billions of mobile users in the world and billions of TV watchers in the world. Um, at that level, like you are able to cause like large shifts in human behavior, and I want to be able to quantify those and like be able to understand them and help companies derive value from that. I like that problem a lot better than a smaller manufacturing problem where one of the projects I had when I first started out was like determining predicting faults in contact lenses. And like yes, that was a really cool algorithmic solution, but like it wasn't the level of impact that I want to have on a product.
Interesting. So what about someone who wants to get into this industry? Like what suggestion or advice you can give them? Like how, if suppose I want to get into this industry, what are some of the things I should do in, like, if I want to tackle data science in, say, mobile or media business, or like what are some of the thoughts that I should do?
Right. So, like, even within, like, mobile companies, the skills and competencies required to be a data scientist within them are, like, vary dramatically. And so I can't really prescribe any set of skills that are really useful except for communication. Communication is like the grand basis of like succeeding anywhere in business. Um, Outside of that, I recommend getting a good mentor. I think that data
That's
science
a good point.
mentorship is something that's been lacking because like there's just not that many of us. It's not as disciplined of a field. Like if you go and talk into any other field, UX design, sales, like you can find mentors out there who can tell you exactly what you need to do and save yourself a lot of time. Like when I was learning to become a data scientist, I wasted a lot of time. I learned R, I learned Java, I learned Python. I like didn't know what to go down. I took Andrew Wang's machine learning course. I took the MIT one. I took the Caltech one. Like, and I didn't know where I would find value. Well, if I like now when I mentor people, like I tell them exactly like you want to go learn Python and pandas, and you want to like take these Coursera classes, and that'll give you a good basis. And then like try to get some side projects, put them up on GitHub. Like that would have saved me an immense amount of time that I think would be helpful for anyone trying to break into this industry, or even people who are already practitioners that want to progress up the chain. Like
I think
that
that's
people component is super important.
I think you hit on the nail here. I think I totally agree. And I would love to reiterate to our audience that yes, I think mentorship, like many of and we also use the word called buddy system. So I think even like so we did a brief survey within our community, figuring out their most of the challenges and what do they know, and that sort of things. And then after a while we realize that from the skill map, like I know this and whatever, and my challenge is I want to learn this, or this is my aspirational skill and this is my current skill. We created kind of a map of all these mentors who could mentor us, which kind of candidates. And so we realized that just by having a healthy mentor and buddy network, you are spot on. Like most of the people that we talk to, and even businesses, they're spending both like lot of money and resources figuring out what to do. And this could be easily solved
Yeah.
by talking to the right people, as you rightly pointed out, that you have some experience, you have wasted your time figuring it out. If everyone is wasting their time figuring it out, that's not efficient. So I think I totally spot on. I think that's very very good piece of advice there.
Yeah, so one of the things I like to do as side projects is to take companies on and consulting gigs and help them set up data science teams. Seeing what their needs are, whether or not they're a 10-person startup, 200-person, or like, a multi-thousand-person company. Like they all have different needs, and of course, connecting that to the right talent. So for companies, it's thinking about the problem sets that you have critically and determining, like, do you need data science there, or is this actually an engineering problem? Like, is machine learning really required to do this, or can you just apply like some if statements that like get you 90% of the way there? Like really
Right.
thinking critically about that problem. Well, on the data science side, on the people side, it's connecting to the right people. Like, yes, I'm at least a half decent engineer, like okay data scientist, petty dabbler in machine learning, whatever. But you ask me to handle a geospatial algorithm, I like wouldn't even know what to do. It'd be like hiring someone on like their first day out of college.
Right.
So like it's about that connection of problem to talent, and I like facilitating that transaction.
I think that's interesting. So I was actually, when you were saying this, I was thinking about this. So you pointed out earlier, engineers are the best sort of ingredients in the soup of data science, right? So now, what is the hope for someone who is not an engineer? Like, what do you think about those guys who are? What are some of the key insights or key suggestions for those guys who want to get into this industry but they're not a typical engineer mold?
Well, there's like a few ways to go about it. So if you are a researcher, like domain expertise in like computer vision or like a particular set of algorithms, like you can work for a larger company where like your engineering chops aren't really as much on the line. Like if you're working for like a Google or an Amazon or Facebook, like as long as your domain expertise is up to snuff, like then you're probably going to be fine. As for everyone else out there that doesn't have a PhD in something super specific and like sellable, it's a little bit harder. So I actually relate data science to CrossFit a lot. This is the analogy that I've been using. Bear with me on this one because it actually goes somewhere. So CrossFitters. CrossFit is an exercise program, kind of cultish. I did that for a few years. Don't judge me. But it's like, you know, there's weightlifting, there's gymnastics, there's running, there's like everything that you could think of. Like CrossFitters say that they are stronger than marathon runners and faster than weightlifters. But at the same time, they are typically extremely mediocre at both. If you go to high levels of CrossFit, the actual component when you're competing in that sport that is on the line is actually strength. And so for data scientists, they are better at software engineering than statisticians, and better at statistics than software engineers. However, they also tend to be fairly mediocre at both. In order to excel as a data scientist, like you need to either specialize a little bit and like get very good at one thing, or the general success criteria for CrossFitters is strength. So you want to get very strong. The general success criteria for data scientists is typically software engineering. So you want to get good at coding. You want to get good at working in teams and building software.
Interesting. So thank you. So I think that's again our audience start doing CrossFits. So good
and the other part of that is, and I'm going to use another metaphor here. It's like building a house. And instead of building a house, like you have your coding skills. Well, if you are building a house, you could have either like an artisanal woodworker that can make like a really beautiful mantle on top of a fireplace. But you can't build an entire house with that. You need guys that like put up drywall. And that's what a software engineering team is. They take like prefabricated components, they put it into place, they like screw it together. Like it's a system. An architect has already designed this for them, and they work together as a team. You get a bunch of like artisans in there, and you're going to get like a structurally unstable mess, which is what a lot of data science and machine learning products are. And so it doesn't require a lot to be a good software engineer. You don't have to be like a Russian hacker that can solve like algorithm challenges. You just need to be able to work in a team and work competently with like good coding practices.
I think that's again beautifully said. So thinking of this as a modular problem, and basically tackling each module that completes all the pieces together. I think that's very well said. So now let's talk about, do you read?
I try.
Awesome. So like what are some of your favorite reads that you could recommend our audience to follow?
So let's see. Lately, I've been focusing a lot more on like managerial and kind of like lifestyle books. I like really appreciate Tim Ferriss's work, not necessarily for all the recommendations strictly, since like he recommends a lot of like kind of crazy stuff out there. Like I'm on board with this kettlebell swing routine and some of the supplements he takes, but like other ones, it's like, come on, man, you're making a lot of money off of affiliate sales on Amazon here.
Yes.
But I really enjoy the principles of chunking and learning, where he takes anything like a language, like learning Korean, and breaking that into independently practicable parts, and like honing those parts separately and bringing it all together to accelerate your own learning and development. So it's like the most important thing that you could do as a human being is to learn. And so like I really appreciate the way he is able to take down these concepts. Like he has an entire book dedicated to cooking that he breaks it down. It's like, okay, you want to learn how to like chop things well. Like, okay, we're gonna have recipes where all you're doing is like really chopping things, throwing them into an oven, or versus like sautéing, versus flambeing, like julienne cutting, like just all independently practical skills that you can bring together, but can be learned on their own.
No, I think you're spot on again. Shout out to Tim Ferriss. I think he is a maestro when it comes to sort of modularizing things and just making a mass. And I think he had figured this piece out, and I would think that someday he'll put out a book, how to create a rocket in 4 hours a week or something. He can. Like he had figured at least that piece out of how to sort of compartmentalize into sort of very efficient chunks and deliver on those outcomes. I think rightly said. So thank you so much for sharing that. So I think we're almost at the tail end of our conversation, Clayton. Yeah. So let's talk about your next ideal hire. What would that be? And if you can sketch that magical mythical creature.
Sure. So I am actually looking for this role right now. So if any listeners out there feel like working in the media space in Boston, I am looking for a machine learning engineer to work on the data science team. So because the team is primarily researchers, not a lot of experience delivering production worthy code, I need someone who can go in and mentor people, someone who can take on 3 or 4 people at a time and bring them up to these standards, keep them disciplined. Because it's not enough to train a machine learning model, right? You need to put it into production. So what does that mean? You need to persist it into some database. You need to serve it in an API. You want to version it so that when you bring out your next iteration of the model, does it perform better? You need monitoring on it. You need to know how many requests per second that it's serving, because if it's lagging behind, is it horizontally scalable? You need all these engineering components around actually serving machine learning models. Right. That without that, it's really hard to bring value to a product. And so I'm looking for that hire that can bring the data science team, half manager, half code slinger, that can really accelerate the team.
Beautiful. So and Clayton, so before we part ways, I'd love to know your closing remarks for our audience. What if you can shed some what do you think are
Sure. So the point that I want to bring home is around mentorship. Whether you are an aspiring data scientist or someone practicing or an executive, mentorship is extremely valuable for the community. It's very rewarding on its own. You learn a lot through teaching others. And so for the more experienced data scientists out there, you'll be surprised on what you will learn while you are guiding someone else. And for the aspirants, find someone who you want to be, and lie, cheat, and steal. Just beg them for some mentorship there, because they will save you an incredible amount of time on getting through that journey. So really emphasizing building that community of data scientists out there, because we should have out. Not everyone knows everything, and you never know when your mentee will be will be a hotshot.
Interesting. I think couldn't have said any better. So as I think mentorship is pretty much this talk, and you have showed in many ways that why do we need mentors. So thank you, Clayton, again for spending time with us, with our community, and sharing your candid thoughts on the industry, shedding lights on why Ocean 11 is a good movie, and why CrossFit is a good program. So thank you so much, and looking forward to having you again back on the show sometime later to discuss your journey and sharing some of your other insights.
Looking forward to it.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
I thought I was sick of home, but actually I was homesick. Never really knew that I would have to grow up so quick. I'm so uncomfortable, don't know anybody here. Just a couple dudes that I met once, that's it. And I go into the booth feeling nervous. Got butterflies in my stomach like I'm so worthless. Is the mic on? I don't know how to work this. Inside I'm breaking down, I hope I'm not up on a